talk about our mouth and the specific microbes that we find in our mouth. The diseases that we might encounter. We can start by talking about cavities, dental caries. All of us, I don't know, I shouldn't say all of us, because maybe not all of us have cavities, but I've certainly had my share of cavities. It is the most common infectious disease in the human population. Principally, it's caused by Streptococcus mutans. This microbe actually can only live on the teeth. It can only adhere to teeth. And so if you don't have teeth, you don't have this microbe in your mouth. The microbe produces a lactic acid that will drive the pH down. And so this lactic acid then causes decay to occur. In addition to that, and we'll say there's a little bit more involved to it than that, but in addition to producing the lactic acid, the microbe also produces something called a glucan. And glucans are byproducts from the metabolizing of sucrose, and they serve to hold the cells together, kind of like a glue. And so you get this polysaccharide now that's kind of serving to hold these cells together in this biofilm, and you get the development of a plaque. So how does this plaque go about forming? If you start, the first step is the result, or the first step happens when you get the bacteria adhering to the teeth. This happens when the saliva forms this little pellicle right on the surface of the teeth. That becomes an attachment site now for bacteria. And so bacteria that are able to adhere to that do so, and other bacteria then adhere to them, and Streptococcus and its related strains fit right into all those bacteria now adhering together. Now, Streptococcus is part of this. When sucrose is in your diet, Streptococcus breaks this sucrose down into glucose and fructose. The fructose, it converts into lactic acid, driving the pH down, and the glucose gets converted to glucans. Like I said, these glucans bind organisms, forming this impenetrable plaque on the surface of the teeth. The saliva now cannot penetrate this plaque, and what you have essentially developing is a sponge that sits right up next to the teeth. And anytime you have sucrose in your diet, not just sucrose, but anything that's going to produce, the microbes that are able to metabolize that might produce an acid, will soak right next to the teeth and cause decay of the enamel. And so that's what happens when plaque builds up on your teeth. You get this acid-soaked sponge just sitting right there, decaying the teeth. So takes probably a couple of hours. If you don't do anything after a sucrose meal, it takes I shouldn't say a couple hours, it takes about 20 minutes for your mouth to regain neutrality, unless you rinse or brush or something like that. And in that time, you've got decay that can take place. One of the ways to reduce tooth decay, of course, is to reduce sucrose in your diet. Reduce sucrose, you don't get the glucan formation, and you reduce the plaque that forms. One of the problems with the formation of plaque is periodontal disease. Periodontal disease is an inflammation of the gums. We often refer to this condition as gingivitis, when the gums become inflamed. And it's caused by plaque, hundreds of bacteria can play a role in causing periodontal disease. What happens is when plaque forms on the teeth, it causes the gums to pull away. So if you imagine now, this is your tooth, and your gums normally are going to be tight up against that tooth. Okay? So your gums are sitting tight against that tooth. When plaque builds up, that plaque starts to cause the gums to pull away from the tooth, and that allows the bacteria to migrate further and further down the tooth. They can eventually make it into the bloodstream, where you can, where it's been suggested that they play a role in hardening of the arteries. When I was growing up, my dental hygiene probably wasn't so good, and I had a lot of cavities. My mother was always taking me to the dentist to get cavities filled. By the time I was 14, I had lots of silver in my mouth. Back when I was growing up, they used silver to fill cavities. So I had lots of silver there, and just hated going to the dentist. So when I turned 18 and I got out of the house, I stopped going to the dentist. I didn't have the money to go to the dentist, didn't have insurance, went to college, and so I thought I had pretty good hygiene. I brushed my teeth twice a day like you're supposed to, but I didn't floss. And I'd say probably about the age of 24, 25, my gums were bleeding all the time. Every time I brushed my teeth, my gums would bleed. And I didn't think anything of it, no big deal. You know, I'm just brushing a little too vigorously. I didn't really understand. I was ignorant, really, if you will. Then I eventually got a job and I got insurance and I went to the dentist. And what had happened and what was happening is that I had plaque that had built up. Even though I was brushing my teeth, I wasn't doing anything about the bacteria that were living right there along the root. And so I had plaque that had built up along the root, pulled the gums away, they were inflamed, and that's why they were bleeding every time I brushed my teeth. So the dentist went in there and he did this thing called a root planing, where he comes and he essentially scrapes the root, scrapes all of the plaque away from the root. Took me 4 visits because he had to do it in quadrants. And then key was to floss. And if you floss, you can get those bacteria away from the root, and it allows the gums to sit up tight against the tooth. Very anal, if you will, about flossing after having gone through this experience there. And if you don't do it, I strongly encourage you that it's one of the best things that you can do for taking care of your teeth is to floss. And you only have to do it once a day. Talk to my dentist about this. Just do it once a day, whenever, because it takes, according to him, and I don't know how much he knows, he's a dentist. According to him, it takes about 24 to 36 hours for real plaque buildup to take place. And if you're flossing once a day, you can prevent that from happening. Whatever routine you use, I couldn't do it at night. I couldn't floss at night. It's too hard for me to get that into my routine. So I do it in the morning. You know, it's part of, you know, you're primping yourself for the day and everything. So I do my flossing in the morning. And I'm very proud of my teeth now. I mean, they're a little crooked down here, and I told you that story about... Did I tell you that story?
Yeah.
No. Okay, so I'm sitting in the chair with the dentist. This dentist does this to me all the time, and he's trying to sell me on getting braces, because my teeth are a little crooked on the bottom, and they've always been that way. Finally, after him hammering me about getting braces, I said, Doctor, before I pay for teeth, I want to buy myself some hair. Anyway, just my public service announcement for flossing. If you don't do it, I encourage you to do it. It'll be one of the best things you do. And it'll cut down on your dental bills as well. Okay. So, one more condition we want to talk about with regards to the mouth, a disease called trench mouth. Trench mouth was a condition that we saw during World War II or World War I and World War II, but probably more during World War I. With the soldiers living into the trenches, you know, they couldn't keep their teeth up as well as they should have. This microbe causes a necrotizing ulcer to develop. So it's actually destroying the tissues. It's a spirochete. Trichomema species. And that's really all I'm going to say about this one particular condition. I don't really know a whole lot about it. That's usually when I move on to the next thing when I don't know that so much. So, moving on to Helicobacter pylori. We're talking about the stomach now, moving away from the mouth. Helicobacter pylori causes gastritis and has been implicated as one of the major causes of ulcers. Up until the 1980s, before the discovery of Helicobacter pylori, ulcers were often considered a condition of stress or alcoholism or very spicy foods or, you know, just some other reason for having an ulcer. Well, it turns out that Helicobacter pylori may be responsible for as many as 80 to 90% of ulcers that are developed. You find it in the stomach and you find it in the duodenum. Unusual to find a microbe that can live in the stomach because it's a very acidic environment. Helicobacter pylori, though, produces a strong urease that is able to convert urea that's in the gastric acids of the stomach, takes that urea and converts it into ammonia, and basically creates this very neutral microenvironment. So right around the cell itself, there's this neutral environment because the microbe can break down urea producing ammonia. It's a microaerophilic organism, and it has very unique flagella that are sheathed. See if I can represent this here. There's a sheath that we find that goes around the flagella of this microbe, and they're at the end of the microbe. So many people have the microbe as part of their normal flora. About 20% of the population has it. So, and it doesn't always cause ulcers. Many of us will live without having any kind of condition. But those that do, what happens is that the microbe will corkscrew through the thick mucal lining of the stomach. So the stomach, of course, if you think about it, has this very thick mucal lining. Cells that are producing mucus here. The microbe, using these sheath flagella, are able to corkscrew through this mucus lining. And they either attach to the cells lining the stomach here, those mucus-producing cells, or they replicate in the vicinity of those cells. Either way, they produce bacterial products that causes an inflammatory reaction, and that inflammatory reaction causes these cells then to reduce their mucus production. The cells themselves may die, and when that mucus production is decreased, it allows for gastric acids now to reach this lining of the stomach, reach these cells in the stomach, and that gastric acid then causes damage to the stomach, causes the ulcers to occur.
Now, how is that transferred? I mean, how does somebody get that?
Making out with the wrong person? Seriously, it's transferred via fecal-oral route, so that would be one of the ways. I actually have had Helicobacter pylori. You'll find out I've had lots of things. went to the doctor again probably about 8 years ago, and one of the things I was experiencing was, I thought, acid reflux, because I was burping a lot and just getting that acid up into the esophagus. And it was just a regular checkup, but they went ahead and did a culture, identified it as Helicobacter pylori, put me on an antibiotic regimen, 2 different antibiotics we used. And within 2 weeks, the symptoms had gone away. And I've been pretty much free of that kind of condition since then. So it is treatable. But like I said, a lot of people don't even know they have it, because it doesn't necessarily cause any condition.
Yeah, I've had it too. And I had a bad cough for about 2 months. Went to my doctor and says just respiratory, so get some medication, but kept having the same thing, acid reflux. So eventually I went to a specialist who then tested me. I had to breathe in through this tube into a little Helicobacter pylori. And so I said, well, how do I pick this up? I've been with my husband for so many years, so I know I'm not making out with the wrong person unless he's doing something. But I was kind of curious, when I heard of this, it was kind of like my regular physician had never heard of it before, so he didn't know.
Well, like I said, fecal oral, so children can get it easily and transfer it to you that way. So there's a number of ways. It's very easy. I mean,